Would you like to play some football?
And welcome to another edition of Gridiron and the Gospel of Faith in College Football Podcast. Middle of December edition, which used to mean lulls, but not now. Plenty of stuff happening, plenty of stuff about to happen. We got all sorts of stuff to talk about. And my name is George Schroeder.
And I'm Brad Edwards. And, since our last podcast, a few things have happened in college football. We have a Heisman Trophy winner now. We have a surefire first ballot Pro Football Hall of Famer who has decided to try his hand at coaching college football. And then we will also get into some playoff picks. And George, you've crossed something off your bucket list that we're going to hear about too. So we've got a few things to get into.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know where to start, really. Let's start with the Heisman real quick. I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, and I know you don't either. It was a fun race. It kind of bubbled under the surface, and one day in an off-season episode, we can talk about whether or not they should push it beyond the regular season. It's always been a regular season award. My fear is that it would become solely a postseason award, limited only to people in the playoffs. What's interesting about this year's is that, and look, there are very good reasons to do that. Maybe go to the end of the year. I understand that. So, but you and I can have that debate or conversation at some point. What's interesting about this year is the top two finishers. Well, that's actually not true. The one who won it is not going to the playoff. Here I am with the old way of thinking. So Travis Hunter from Colorado won it. Two-way player, played so many snaps, so good on both sides of the balls as a defensive back and a wide receiver for Colorado, won it. Ashton Jeanty, a tremendous running back at Boise State who, rushed for amazing amounts of yards and frankly is the biggest single catalyst that for Boise State being in the playoff. It finished second, and it was a tight vote, tightest vote since 2009. And then Dylan Gabriel, who's the only quarterback you would consider to be elite of all the contenders at this point, probably. At least all he's done is just be very consistent and perform near the top of his game most of the year. And in most years, he's probably your winner. That's what's unusual about this year, Brad. So what did you think about that? Who would – neither one of us has a vote. I had one at one point. And
I did too.
You don't have a vote. But who would you have voted for? What did you think about how it went? You probably have somebody down the marquee that you would vote for. I'll ask.
Many years I did vote for someone who was not one of the top three finishers because I tried to take it very seriously, like most outstanding player in college football, not, the marquee player on, one of the national championship contending teams, which is so often what it defaults to. And as you kind of alluded to, if we were to change and do Heisman voting after the playoff, it most certainly would go even more in that direction. But, this is an unusual year where you have not only a guy who was not on a playoff team, and by the way, this being a 12-team playoff, not a 4-team, but a 12-team playoff, and his team still wasn't in it, and yet he won it, and in spite of not being a quarterback or a running back. Then, the other guy you mentioned, Jeanty, he was a running back, but he was for a team that was not in a power conference, that didn't play. I mean, let's be honest, did not play a lot of high-profile games. I mean, if any. I mean, I remember week 2 when they played Oregon. That wasn't a big game for that week. There weren't a lot of people nationally watching that game. So I don't even know how many people who vote for the Heisman would have seen Jeanty play more than one or two times, and yet they still voted for him, which I think not only says a lot about him as a candidate, but I also, to kind of go in the other direction, think it says something about this year. And you mentioned Dylan Gabriel and how he kind of fits the mold of the typical guy that the Heisman voters would prop up. Quarterback who put up impressive numbers on a highly ranked team. And yet when you look around, I mean, I hate to be pessimistic, George, but I think part of the reason that we got Hunter and Jeanty at the top of the list is that there weren't a lot of other quarterbacks on high-profile teams that had great statistical seasons. In fact,
or
this past week, or running backs as well. And this past week, I saw at least 3 different lists on X, on Twitter, of different people ranking the quarterbacks for the 12 playoff teams. Each list was different. They all had Dylan Gabriel at number 1, but as they went down the rest of the list, it wasn't just that they had them in different orders. It was that when you sit there and you look at that list, you realize, yeah, I mean, there aren't many what you would call difference makers at quarterback among the playoff teams. And so I look at this year as probably an aberration. I don't think there are going to be many years where that's the case. But when it does happen and you get, a couple of guys who I think legitimately were two of the most impactful players in the nation, I think it's a good thing.
I do too. I don't have any issues with it all. Travis Hunter is a unicorn, and he's legitimately, let me just tell you guys, he's every bit as good as the highlights. And then when you think about the fact that he's playing 400 more snaps than anybody else in college football at that, and he's essentially playing it at that high level on both sides of the football, it's amazing. I don't know what he'll do in the NFL. That's another topic for a draft special or something. But what you laid out there wasn't sort of that dominant quarterback, wasn't that dominant running back or 2 or 3 as we've seen in years past. And then the other piece of it is that's really interesting is there's not a top 10 finisher from the South region, from the SEC region, where typically there'll be someone, and that group of voters often votes in lockstep quite often. All of those factors came together and made it a perfect time for a guy. You called the year an aberration, and it is. I would say Travis Hunter himself is an aberration, just in terms of you don't find that. Made it a perfect time for him to win it.
Yeah.
And it elevated Ashton Genty to a position that, despite, I mean, he every bit deserves to be the number 2 vote getter. He could have easily have been the winner. You shouldn't have quibbled had he won it. He was that good. But in most years, it would have been, that's nice, and he would have gotten a pat on the head. You did it against Mountain West competition or whatever, and he would have finished 5th or 6th. Maybe he would have gotten an invite to New York. So good for him, and I'm sure he's disappointed about not winning. I know his fan base is. That's true, because that's true of a lot of fan bases. It's probably more true when it's not something you've really sniffed before from your school. But I thought it was I didn't have any issues with the voting. I thought it was fascinating that it was as close as it was, but I kind of thought it might be. So closest one since 2009. I think I said that a minute ago.
Yeah, and I do think that Travis Hunter will go on to do great things in the NFL as long as he stays healthy. And he'll be one of those guys that we'll look back years from now, much like Charles Woodson, where you're like, yeah, that guy was legit. And people obviously at the time were saying, how did Charles Woodson win over Peyton Manning? And Peyton Manning very clearly would have been a great pick as well, and went on to have a great career. Not that you need the NFL to legitimize whether you were worthy of winning a Heisman, but there have been many great college players who have won the Heisman that they were a better college player than they were ever going to be in the pros. And sometime because of pro performance, people will look back and say, yeah, you know what, that guy really shouldn't have won. He wasn't the best player. Well, that may or may not be true, but in the case of Travis Hunter, I think this is a guy who's going to play a lot more football for the rest of his life. And I think that we'll look back on this historically and say, yeah, that was a pretty good pick. If you were going to go off the radar and take someone who was not a quarterback or a running back, that was a guy who was legit.
Yeah, and let me just state my own position on that. It's the most outstanding college player that season, right? And so I don't care if you never played down the NFL. Most of the time they do. Sometimes they're just meh in the NFL, and sometimes they're really good. And in that case, it's like, okay, best of both worlds. So I really don't care, if they're great in the NFL, other than just wanting them to do well. That doesn't impact for me. Pro potential or whatever, or what they do later doesn't tell me that was a good Heisman pick. There have been some bad Heisman picks. We could do that in the off season too, but I don't want those guys' moms to start calling us either. So that's never fun. It's not the spirit of the show,
No, we don't want to get Boise State Twitter after you there.
Well, that could happen, right? That definitely could happen. So look, one of the things that this will probably have to be put a pin in it and say, is something that you said really is right, is you rank the 12 teams quarterbacks in the playoff, and you're right. Gabriel is far and away the one that you would say, well, there's the one guy. So if you want to pick a team based on dynamic quarterback, that's not a bad way to pick a team. That's one of the reasons why when you and I talked a week ago, I sort of said I kind of see perhaps maybe the team that I would ride finally at the end of this weird year. Quarterback, that's where you start. This is a really weird year because the quarterback play could rise to a level or it could just be pretty mediocre, which means anybody could win. And like for the team that's going to be seeded number 2, Georgia, we don't have the first clue who's going to play quarterback.
Right.
That's going to be really interesting too. It's not, and let me just say this. I think we kind of know, and it's not going to be Carson Beck more than likely, but who knows? There's all sorts of crazy medical voodoo that they're doing down there in offense.
And along those lines, and we'll get to our playoff picks a little bit later on here, but I don't think this is a year where you're going to win the playoff by just having a quarterback who goes out and doesn't make mistakes. One of these guys, if it's not Dylan Gabriel, one of these guys who's had a very inconsistent regular season is going to need to step up and be consistent for 3 or 4 games in a row, playing at a high level for somebody else to win this thing. And it could happen, but the reason we're having this conversation is because so few of those guys have been consistently good week in and week out.
That's right. And some of them with big names have not done that. So, hey, but look, here's the deal. We got the opportunity to get into that a little bit here later. Let's go back to developments, non-playoff developments. North Carolina ways with Mac Brown, who is 73, and maybe the ending wasn't the way you would have wanted it, but you can kind of see it coming. You understood why it happened, and I've always liked and appreciated Mac Brown. It wasn't working. It was kind of beginning what looked like a slow spiral, and so it was time.
Mm-hmm.
But they hired after a search that I'm not sure is a textbook way to do it, and it appeared to have lots of cooks in the kitchen, where you have the regents saying we want this, and the athletic trying to conduct a regular search, and then I think the regents won. Bill Belichick, who is 72 years young. He'll be 73 when they kick off next fall. Bill Belichick leaves the GOAT, right? Leaves his retirement and is getting back into coaching at the college football level at North Carolina. And it sort of a little, a little earthquake there in Chapel Hill. That's quite a hire. And I'm interested in what your take is on that. I've got some opinions that are fairly strong which means they're probably wrong. But what did you think about that?
Well, I'm looking forward to hearing your opinions then. Yeah, it is kind of crazy. And I think not only the fact that he's old, right? I mean, I'm sure, George, when you and I are 72, we won't think of ourselves as old. But in terms of a football coach, whether it's at the college or NFL level, being in your 70s, old, that's one part of it. The other thing, though, is, when Tom Brady left New England, a lot of people felt like, all right, we're going to find out something now. What was it, Belichick or was it Brady? And I don't think it's all that controversial to say that after Brady left, Belichick didn't have the same success. And that's not to say that he isn't a great football coach, right? But it's not like he left on top. It's not like there were no questions about him and how good of a coach is he really? Like, is he like one of the 3 to 5 best to ever coach the game? And I think if we were certain of that and that he had gone out after winning a Super Bowl, I think there would be fewer questions right now about this hire. But the combination of his age, the fact that he didn't go out on top, that the Patriots were declining after Brady left, I think all that contributes to skepticism, and not to mention the fact that college football is a very different thing to coach than the NFL. Now, granted, because of some of the recent changes and especially NIL, players getting paid, it is more like the NFL in a sense than it was before. And so, we know Belichick can deal with egos of players who are making a lot of money, but is he prepared to deal with the ego of a 19-year-old who feels like he should be making more money?
How about the
the
19-year-old
parents getting
calling?
involved, right? He hasn't had to deal with that. But there's so many parts of this. And by the way, in the NFL, they actually have contracts, right? And I don't know where we're going with college football and whether we might be there soon. But at least as of this moment, you could go all in and sign one of the top recruits in the nation out of high school. And then at the end of his freshman year, he decides he wants to go play somewhere else and you can't stop him. That can't happen with a rookie in the NFL. Like you get that second round pick that was like diamond in the rough and the guy really like played like a top 10 pick. You've still got him for a few more years. And in this case, not necessarily. So anyway, those are some of the reasons that I'm skeptical about the Belichick hire. I think there's a possibility he could do a great job, but I'm more inclined to think this is probably not going to turn out well.
Well, I'm glad you went there because I'm about to say I think it's the best hire in the history of the known football world. Not really. We're on the same page here, Brad. So it makes the podcast less fun when you and I hate each other. But and I'm kidding. But let me just tell you this: I'm glad you brought the Tom Brady thing in too, because there was a clear slippage. They were not the same. I think Bill Belichick is the best pro football coach ever. I don't have an issue with that. He also was blessed with the best quarterback ever. Not necessarily stats and yards, but win these games. Maybe at some point we're going to say Patrick Mahomes surpasses Tom Brady, but there's a long way to go to get there, right? And that's just the nature of things. Someday a coach will pass Belichick, but he'll probably have a Patrick Mahomes type or a Tom Brady type. I'm glad you said that. Tom Brady's not walking through that door with eligibility. Let's put it that way at Chapel Hill. And here's the thing. You don't get to just draft them, by the way. You do get to recruit them in the way that you get to recruit free agents, sort of, but it's different. And they are 18 years old and 17 years old and 16 years old when you start them, and you're dealing with the parents, and you're also dealing with guys who are air quotes. If you guys are watching on YouTube, air quotes agents. By the way, if you're watching on YouTube, I don't know if you know, we got the memo today. We wore the same Gridiron the Gospel uniform. Brad, nice job. So, but you're dealing with these
wearing
sort
our
of
home
guys
blacks today.
College football is getting more professionalized in that some of the representation that the players have are legitimate and professional, and some of them have been some of the folks, or at least types of folks, that you would have dealt with before at the NFL level. But many of them are not yet. Many of them that you're dealing with are just, a self-styled marketing guy or whatever who's become close to the player and or family and is sort of making phone calls on his behalf. And it's the Wild West out there. You got to deal with all that to get them to Chapel Hill, to tell them that, yes, I'm 72, about to be 73, going to be here a while, though, I promise you, and we're going to build something. Here's the other thing. Beyond all that, and this isn't just because I covered college football forever, I think. It's not because I don't like to hear this stuff. When I hear him talk about coming in and doing things, kind of with an NFL model, and we're going to develop them for the NFL and this, that, and the other, I'm like, is that not what Alabama's been doing? And Georgia and Ohio State? And insert school here. Lots of schools have been doing it well. Most of them didn't have quite as many players. Yep. Right, LSU. Most of them didn't have quite as many players as those schools we just mentioned, but many of them know how to develop players to get to the NFL. The ones that are good enough to get there. When I hear that, I hear Herm Edwards getting hired at Arizona State, and they're going to have a capital N, capital L, capital N, new leadership model where it's going to be very NFL-like. And that, look, as much as I enjoyed my conversations with Herm and they had some early success, that thing was, never mind the NCAA issues, that thing was not working. That new leadership model wasn't working. Or I hear before that, Charlie Weiss comes in and he's going to have a decided schematic advantage, Brad. A decided schematic advantage.
Remember
like
that.
These guys don't know how to coach that you're coaching against. Like they don't know the first thing about checking out cut-ups and designing a play that can beat you or a defense that can stop you. That's what I hear. Now, I think he's really good. I do. But I think some of the people they're going to go against are pretty good at scheming things up, and they got players too. I don't know. The biggest thing is recruiting. Can you get players to North Carolina just based on your name and the Super Bowl rings. Can you get enough of them and then keep them? And obviously they're going to commit to paying them to actually make a dent at any high level, like playoff winning level. And I don't know, and can you do all that quickly and keep it that way even as you continue to advance in years? I don't know, if he was 50
Yeah,
to 53, that'd be different.
Right. Yeah, I think there probably were a number of boosters who stepped up and said, "Hey, we're going to put this much money into it to make sure you have the best players." Well, that sounds
Sure.
good
Yeah.
until you realize how many other programs out there also have boosters that have a ton of money, and they're willing to pay just as much to get those players to come to their schools. And so when you're North Carolina and you're offering X amount and you're trying to get the player away from a Ohio State or a Texas that is offering the same amount, well, which program has a better track record of winning big at the college level? Which program has a better track record of putting guys in the NFL? And I'm not doubting that Belichick can do that, but I don't think it's going to be as easy as some may think to just, okay, now we're going to put together a lot of money and all of a sudden we're going to have a roster that's like half of them are going to be future NFL players. I don't think it works out that way because these bidding wars are real.
Yeah, no, agreed. So color us both as skeptics, right? I don't think I'm cynical.
Right.
Now, he's apparently spent a lot of time around UW, the Washington football program, which Jed Fish has, of course, struggled in his first year, where his son, Belichick's son, is on staff. And so he's been sort of, and if you listen to what some of the stuff he's said, it sounds an awful lot like the way Jed Fish would describe stuff. And Jed has NFL background and things like that too. My bigger deal isn't even about his age. It starts with the NFL guys routinely come down. They think they're going to well, we know how to do it. Well, you're a really good coach. You may be better than every other coach you go up against. You may have a tiny or mid-sized schematic advantage. It's not going to be decided, but you got to get better players. And this is a completely different game because of all this stuff that goes around. I'm also looking forward to Bill Belichick on the barbecue circuit in the Carolinas in the off season, and glad handing his 100th booster for the seventh evening in a row. Good luck with that, Bill. That'll be fun.
Yeah.
So anyway,
yeah, and we know how much he loves to talk to the media, and at North Carolina, you not only have your regular media obligations, but now you have the ACC network. And I mean, look, let's just call it like it is. It's a network that doesn't have a very big audience, and yet you're required to give them a lot of access and time. So I'm sure that's not going to sit well with him either, but that's part of the job. And once again, it's one of those things you just wonder as you start to stack these things on top of each other, is he prepared for that?
Well, and part of it is you have to sell your program. The coaches understand every time you get on the air, as much as you may hate it or get in a press conference situation, you're selling the program. You didn't have to sell the program with the Patriots, other than to a few free agents every year, every couple of years. It'd be a high profile guy that you might, whatever Bill Belichick's version of whining and dining is, you might do that. But all right, so enough of Bill Belichick. It's going to be something that we pay a lot of attention to, and we'll see. We'll see. Who knows? Maybe. We'll see. That takes us to a couple of coaching carousel things that we didn't get to last week. So Gus Malzahn, a longtime friend of mine, left UCF. And this is one of those weird things that we're going to perhaps see more of in some ways. But UCF is a Power 4 job now. It's not a Group of 5 job. It's a Power 4 job. They're in the Big 12 for the second year, I guess.
Yeah.
He just left head coaching and went to Florida State. Now, on the surface, as offense coordinator, now he worked. Mike Norvell was a protege of Gus's way back. So they've known each other for a long time. But this is on the surface, an odd move. I will just tell you that, having texted with Gus a little bit, all of the things that attend to coaching now, and some of which we just touched on, that don't have anything to do with actual coaching, I think he got tired of it all. And here's a guy who doesn't need the money because of the Auburn buyout from a few years ago. And he just said, hey, I'm going to go call up ball plays right now. Who knows whether that works or not? Because I'm a big fan of Gus, I hope it does. just that's a. I mean, what did you think when you saw that?
Well, I didn't think much of it because, like you said, we saw it last year. There were a few instances last year of a guy giving up an FBS head coaching job
Mm-hmm.
to take an assistant job at a Power Four school. Now, the only other one I can think of where someone did what Gus did, which is to give up a head coaching job in the Power Four to be a coordinator elsewhere in the Power Four, that was Chip Kelly, who left UCLA and went to Ohio State.
That's right.
But like I said, even that we had seen it a year ago, so it's not shocking. Look, and Chip Kelly, like Gus Malzahn, he's made plenty of money. You know, he wasn't in head coaching at UCLA in order to get rich. He already had plenty of money. It's just about being happy, and a lot of those things that head coaches have to deal with, coordinators don't. And you go to where he can just call ball plays, and I don't think we're gonna, this is necessarily gonna be something we see every single year, but I think we'll see it often enough that it's not going to be shocking when it does happen. Now some of the others, for example, like Alabama had a couple of assistant coaches who had been head coaches within the group of five, and they, as far as I'm aware, were actually getting a pay raise to come to the Power Four school and be an assistant coach. That's a little bit different of a thing, but still, for those who are have ambitions of being a head coach at a high level, is that the best way to get there, to go from being a head coach to being an assistant? I don't know. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Time will tell. But yeah, I don't think I don't think moves like this by Malzahn are going to be rare when we just look at it moving forward.
Yeah, fair enough. I think you're right about that. And so, but then what happened? What happened after that seemed a little crazy. Quite frankly, it was just Scott Frost ends up. He was an analyst in an NFL team, but his second year out after getting fired in Nebraska. But of course, he had all that success at UCF, and he ends up coming back to UCF. And I don't know how Act Two will go, but that's a fascinating move. If I'm UCF, I find that to be a pretty good move. I don't know if he can recapture the success or not. Have no idea. It's a different world. He's in a different. UCF's in a different atmosphere, but if you want to win the press conference, which sadly is sort of the goal a lot of the times, that Scott Frost coming back to UCF is a pretty good move.
Look, I don't know why things didn't work at Nebraska. I know most people were really surprised by that he didn't have more success, but that's the way it worked out. And, does that say more about Nebraska, or does it say more about Scott Frost? And I think we're going to get a little bit of the answer to that question coming up here. But like you said, this is not the same program that he left. He previously coached them when they were a group of five program that had a lot of talent for the group of five level, right? And getting a few of those players in the state of Florida who maybe had flirted with FSU and Florida and Miami. He was able to get a couple of those, and then he was able to get some guys who maybe weren't quite good enough to get an offer from those places. Or, look, we know everybody goes into Florida to recruit. Sometimes guys just fly under the radar, and there are really good players who have NFL type talent. There's just not room for all of them, or they're not all going to be noticed. And he did a good job getting some of those guys, coaching them up, and they had a lot of success. Will it be the same now that they're in the Big 12? I don't know, and I guess we're going to find out here. But it is an intriguing hire, and especially when he goes back there, it tells you that he really believed in that opportunity, and as far as being able to have long-term success. Because if it was one of those situations where it's like, okay, this Nebraska chance comes along, and sure, it's my alma mater, but I kind of felt like I can't sustain this much long. Look, he couldn't have sustained the record because he had so much success there. The winning percentage was eventually going to dip. But could he have continued to have really good seasons there? I don't know. Maybe it was as simple as, hey, Nebraska's my school. And if that was the only reason he left, then it makes a lot of sense that given the opportunity that he would come back to UCF.
No, that's right. It'll be interesting to see. That's what I love about college football. These are wild and wacky moves. They're not what you would expect, right? Scott Frost comes back with Miles Malzahn as Chip Kelly. And I'm glad you mentioned that. As Chip Kelly did a year earlier, Malzahn goes back to FSU. By the way, one of the subplots of that is Mike Norvell has always been the play caller, even as a head coach. So he's giving it up to Malzahn, and that's always a question. You always have a question of how that's going to go. So Scott Frost goes back to UCF. And the other one,
I think Malzahn dealt with that when he was at Auburn, right? Where he was calling the plays, and he eventually got to a point where he hired an offensive coordinator to actually do the play calling. So,
and it's gone back and went back and forth on it, right? So it's one of those things where I think once you call the plays, sometimes you have a hard time letting go. But you don't find a lot of guys, and that's another thing we can chase that rabbit a while, and I don't have an issue with us doing it, but you don't find a lot of guys these days, especially as the role of head coach continues to expand, but also change, who are actually able to call the plays, whether it's offense or defense. And when you do call the plays and things aren't going so hot in the program in any area, people start to go, well, are you spending too much time with the quarterbacks or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
So Rich Rodriguez had a tremendous amount of success in Morgantown, West Virginia years ago, and essentially took the Alabama job and turned them down, and then made a really weird coaching move decision on both parties and went to Michigan, and it didn't work out, despite Shoelace Robinson. And things have never been the same for Rich Rodriguez. But they fired Neil Brown or parted ways with Neil Brown, and Rich Rod is proving that country roads do take you home. I guess is that how the lyric goes? That is how the lyric goes. I knew that, right?
Yeah, that is how it goes.
And when he left West Virginia, Brad, they were not happy with him. It was a how could you leave us parting? They're happy to see Rich Rod back. And I actually think of all the hires, this might be the one that could go really well in 2.0.
Could work.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
and I actually agree with you on that because look, Rich Rod ended up after Michigan, ended up at Arizona, and
yep, he did a good job at Arizona. By the way, I mean he did a good job at Arizona.
Yeah. I was going to say it was a mixed bag, but definitely was a lot better than the Michigan, experiment. But
right.
But you look at what he's done now at Jacksonville State, just won the conference title. And Rich Rod can still coach. And I think that's why I share your optimism here that this could work for West Virginia, is because what he does, it still works in college football. And now he's going back to West Virginia, where they are no longer a member of the Big East. They are now in the Big 12. And I think there's a real opportunity in this conference that, I mean, look, we saw what happened with the title chase in its first year of this expanded group where, I mean, it was totally up for grabs. And I don't think there's any reason that you would sit here and say that West Virginia isn't capable of being in that mix. So I would be excited too if I'm a West Virginia fan. And obviously, like we just said about Scott Frost, the fact that he was interested in going back tells you that, he still sees a lot of the potential that he saw when he was there the first time.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. In fact, I think there may be more potential at West Virginia. I realized they were this close to being in the championship game in the old BCS
championship
in 2007. Probably still angry with Pittsburgh, but that's just a steady state anyway. But
should
I
have
think
won the
that's
game,
a good
right?
hire. Yeah, it definitely gives us stuff to watch, stuff to track during the offseason, and then it's going to be fun once we get to the 2025 season. So here's a weird one, though, and we're going to get to our picks here in a little bit, and we're actually going to talk about the playoff when we get to it. But here's a weird one. The Independence Bowl announced that they were replacing Marshall with Louisiana Tech. Independence Bowl is the landing spot for Army, the American Athletic Conference champion, and they Army lost to Navy. I'll talk about that here in a little bit too, real quick. But the Independence Bowl had to replace Marshall because Marshall pulled out. And they pulled out because they had how many players in the transfer portal?
I think last I saw was like 36 players, 17 of whom were on the two deep for the Sun Belt championship game.
Yeah,
that's a big deal.
Which they won. That Marshall is a Sun Belt champion, and part of the reason that, maybe not all the reason, people are going to be in the portal these days. In fact, Penn State's backup quarterback who gets used in run packages and things like that. is
Yeah.
going into the portal. So it's actually impacting playoff teams, and not just with lower guys on the depth chart. Even though I know he's a number 2, but he's actually used in games quite often, fairly often. It's
Yep.
impacting playoff teams too, but it's impacting the bowl games like crazy. And this is the first time they've had to replace a team because a team pulled out because they had too few players. But it's not the last time it's going to happen, I don't think. And the reason is because of this wacky story that we won't be able to get into very much. But Charles Huff was the Marshall coach, led him to the Sun Belt title while playing out the last year of his contract because they couldn't agree on an extension and wanted to go a different direction. And basically, he won the championship. And then the next day shows up at Southern Miss, the worst team in the Sun Belt, as their new head coach. So Charles Huff sort of leaves, gets pushed out, and then all the players leave too. And next thing you know, there's Marshall's not really a viable candidate. At least Marshall didn't think so, to play in the Independence Bowl, which left them scrambling, and they went and got a 5-7 Louisiana Tech team to play Army, which I hate that for Army. But I mean, it's just, this is the new world we live in.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. And even though Charles Huff wasn't technically fired, I think it's obvious that Marshall didn't really want him back, or else they would have come to terms on a new deal. This is something that I was just waiting for when this would eventually happen, as soon as the rules were changed to allow the players to transfer without sitting out a year. It's like, at what point is a quarterback, not a quarterback, at what point is a head coach going to lose his job where the players support the head coach to the degree that they're willing to leave with him? It's like, if he's not going to be my coach, I don't want to stay here. And a bulk of the roster leaves, and now you don't even have a team anymore. And as far as I'm aware, this is the first time that we've actually seen it play out this way. And it's devastating. And look, if you're an administrator, you can't be making important decisions about the football program or any other program based on what the players want. Okay, you can't let the players make those choices for you. At the same time, though, you have to recognize they now have enough leverage in this current environment that if you don't take into consideration what they want, that they can really sabotage your program moving forward. And look, I don't know if all these guys will end up transferring out. Some of them could elect to stay depending on who they hire as the next coach.
Well, they hired Tony Gibson, defensive coordinator from, I think, NC State. I should know that.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Yep. And but some of them could decide to come back. But if they don't, I mean, you're talking about a lot of work that's going to have to be done to bring in guys who are transferring out of other places and rebuild a roster, because that's a significant number of players that you've lost. And more than likely, it's going to prevent you from being able to contend for a conference title at least next season. And who knows how many years total it'll take to recover from it. So it is, like you said, this is the new world of college football. And even though as an administrator, you can't bow down to what the players want, you still have to recognize that they do have some power to kind of pull that rug out from under you. And in this case, the players at Marshall basically did that.
Right, that's right. And I don't know that there was any concerted effort to do that and create a bowl. They were all just individually thinking of their own place. But the issue here is one of timing, and they've set up the portal windows based on when semesters end and when semesters begin, so that you can find your next school and transfer, because, at least marginally, it's supposed to be about academic terms, right? But I will tell you this, it is wild, wacky, and untenable that people are transferring as seasons are continuing to go on. I don't know how they fix it. I think they're going to have to tweak the dates somehow, while still allowing you to have time to get enrolled and in classes by the next term. So, but they're going to have to fix that, because it's crazy that you're able to just leave during the season. So this is where you go, okay, does football wag the dog here, or does academics wag the dog? And I think we all know where we're coming from, and most of our listeners are coming from. We think football wags the dog. It's a huge industry. It's the front door to your school, but it is, it's 2, 3, 5% of your president's budget, even if it's occupying 80% of his time. So I don't know what they're going to do with it, but it's, the timing of the portal is as much as of a problem as the completely free transfers and the NIL money that's waiting. You put all those things together in this particular period of time in December is crazy.
Yeah,
So
and you mentioned, George,
coaches
there.
hosting visits from potential incoming players who are wanting to transfer there while they're preparing for playoff games.
Right.
So,
Yeah, it is insane, and we don't have time to get into everything that's happening in the transfer portal. But there have been significant players who have already put their names in, starting quarterbacks at Power 4 schools.
Absolutely.
And you even mentioned you referenced Bo Pribula from Penn State, who like you said he is a very mobile quarterback who is a strong runner. And they have put packages in specifically for him that they have used throughout the season. And now he's gone because you said, the academic calendar kind of requires him, or at least it puts him in a position where he feels like he needs to act now in order to transfer to a place to have a chance to go through spring practice and become the starter next fall. And he's, it's impacting Penn State being able to utilize their full offensive playbook in the playoff, however many games that lasts for them. And so this is, an unintended consequence. I don't think people were really foreseeing something like this happening when they put all these dates and timelines together between, whether it was signing day or the transfer window or the playoff schedule and all this stuff. It was all done kind of a rush. And now you're starting to see some of the things that happen as a result of that. But yeah, transfer madness is going on at the same time as the coaching carousel.
Absolutely. Reminder, there is a 10-day spring portal window. A lot of these guys want to move on to the next school, and you understand why. You can get into your classes and continue working on your degree more quickly. And I'm kidding with that, but there ought to be something about that. It usually isn't, but really you can get involved in winter workouts and then do spring practice. So there's a 10-day spring portal window. Players who are participating in playoff games that would end after the current portal closing date of December 28th do receive an extension. So you could stay, but in this case, Penn State's not necessarily. You basically feel like you've got to get moving and figure out what you're going to do. So we'll see. We'll see where it goes, but crazy. All right, I guess I should get to the bucket list so that we can get to our picks and actually talk playoff. But man, here's the thing. And I have been able to do a lot of bucket list things through the years, right? Lots of bucket list things. I could start listing the games that we covered, which meant we were able to go to, and then you didn't maybe have a traditional fan experience in them, but you were able to be at these venues that we see on TV and at these giant events that you'd always wanted to go to as a kid. And I love that. There's one, and I'm sure I could come up with another one or two or five that I haven't been to. I've been to five, and I'm thankful for that. That was one of the great things about covering college football, right? One, I've never been to, always wanted to go to. It was never going to happen when I was at USA Today because we had guys who lived on the East Coast. And so it made sense for them to cover this game, America's game, the best game, Army-Navy. And so, as we record this, we're actually recording this Monday morning because of my travel schedule afterwards. But as we record this, it's only been a couple of days since my son George and I were in Landover, Maryland at Northwest Stadium where the Commanders play to see Army-Navy, the 125th meeting of Army-Navy. And it was everything that I thought it would be based on what you've seen on TV all those years. I'm so glad that I was able to do that. I'm glad I was able to do that with my son, who's not in the Army or the Navy, but is a newly minted Air Force officer. And so that was it was still really meaningful to him just to see sort of the pomp, the tradition, just sort of the mutual respect and the respect that's given to all of the folks in the stands who serve, and to those young men who are about to serve us. It was everything you'd hope it would be. I'm so glad I got to go. My only question is, how do I go to 126th and 126th? The answer is I probably can't, but at least I got to cross something off a bucket list. It was really fun. Navy won, so the right team won, and I'm kidding, but I just sort of have chosen Navy as my team to follow because of a story I wrote several years ago about Jaron Jasper. Ivan Jasper is a longtime offensive assistant at the Naval Academy. Still there. A couple different head coaches. And 6, 7, 8 years ago, his son had a routine heart ablation where they like go in and try to shock the heart into a correct rhythm. It didn't go well. And the next thing you know, it had damaged the heart and he needed a heart transplant. And so he received one, and not to bury the lead, all these years later, he's doing really, really well. But he was a teenager at the time, and it was a terrible story, and then it was a good story, and I was able to kind of get to know that family a little bit to write a story about it, which was meaningful to me because our youngest obviously had a heart transplant when he was a baby, and is doing well too. But I've sort of thought, okay, I'll be a Navy fan for that reason. So I don't have any deep ties, deep nautical ties or anything, but it was just a ton of fun. I had a great amount of fun. And had Army won, we'd have walked away happy as well because I'm not Navy. But it was a ton of fun. I'm so glad I got to go. You and I've talked about this. I think that's one of the few things you've not been to as well. Is that
It
right?
is, yeah.
Navy.
Yeah. That's
You're on the
definitely
East
one of the big
Coast.
ones. Yeah. And for so many years, I worked the Heisman Trophy ceremony. And so after the game had been moved to that weekend, there was no opportunity for me to do it. But now I do have the chance to go, and I would like to do so soon. I think it's cool that because one of the stories that was very popular about midway through the season was that Army and Navy were both undefeated, and they got pretty deep into the season, both of them. Obviously, Army went a little bit further. Well, actually, both of them was just a matter of when they had to play Notre Dame. And so Navy finally took a loss to Notre Dame, then Army did. But both of them had a great season. And then in the end, Navy wins the Commander-in-Chief trophy. Army wins the American Athletic Conference championship, which, the league they both play in. And so both of them ended up being champions and having a trophy to show for this season, which I think was a great story. And just along those lines, like I realized that there was a potential it could have created a real train wreck for the selection committee, but I'm glad that they have pushed that game back to a weekend where it really stands alone. Because when it used to be played on the conference championship game weekend, it just not only did it not have the stakes of the other games, because you're playing in some of those cases, you have like national championship berths that are hanging in the balance. But beyond that, it's you don't have rosters that are filled with guys who are high on NFL draft boards and all that. And so it was very easy for that game to get buried and not really appreciated. So I'm glad that they've moved it, not only for that reason, but also because it gives a chance for people like us to be able to go see it now.
Well, that's right. And also, by the way, had it been still on conference championship weekend, Army would not have been able to play in the American Athletic Conference Championship game. But no, I'm glad it is what it is. And I want to say one thing. I'm guessing Army would trade trophies. But by the way, Army won 11 games this year so far, and is going to end in Pensacola. Navy has won, I think, 9. So they're, 9-4 or whatever they are. Navy's won 9. This is
9-3, yeah.
Yeah, this is the most. Yeah, they're 9-3. This is the most games they had won going in, and now still coming out together. In years and forever, basically. And Navy obviously has a chance to go. They're playing in the Armed Forces Bowl, so you wouldn't expect them to have a shot at that. But you never know what team's going to show up from the Power 4 program in a lower level bowl like that, right? They've lost a lot of players. That's one of the things about Army and Navy. I did see an Army player has entered the portal, which jarred me.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
But Army and Navy players aren't entering the portal. They're also not receiving players from the portal. They are quite literally off the field playing a different game. I'm just talking about the football. Never mind the military academy life and where they're headed afterwards to serve us, but just off the field. And then what's nice is that on the field, they were so competitive this year, as you were mentioning a minute ago, that they're playing the same game and winning at it. So I would just say this: it was a great day. I was glad to be with George, my son. I was glad to be there. And I would listen, if you guys ever get a chance to find your way to Army Navy, go ahead and do it. It's worth it. That's what I would tell you. That's what I would say. So, but having said all that, and we could have talked about that a long time, we shouldn't. It's time for us to get to our picks, Brad, and get into the first round of the playoff. It's just crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I
It
should
is.
tell
It
you
is.
guys, I want to thank the Faith and Sports Institute at Baylor's Truett Seminary for sponsoring the picks this month and next. Baylor's Truett Seminary and the Faith and Sports Institute, the ethos is think deep, lead strong, run the race well. And the Faith and Sports Institute is a team of athletes, coaches, chaplains, and scholars who provide theological education, compelling research, and formative practices for Christian leaders in sports. They have graduate degree programs, they have online certificate programs, and they have a Master of Arts in Theology and Sports Studies online. And you find a lot of practitioners in cohorts together, athletic directors, folks who work for parachurch sort of ministries like a Fellowship of Christian Athletes, Athletes in Action type of thing, college administrators in various roles, high school coaches who are involved in that MA in theology and sports studies online. It's tremendous. The only thing that probably people would like better about that is if they were together, but it allows you to do that without picking up and leaving the place that you're serving in ministry. And so I would commend the Faith and Sports Institute to anybody. You guys should check it out. I love the concept and I love how they're executing it. So thank you guys for sponsoring our picks.
Yeah, thank you. Absolutely. And now they're getting to sponsor some actual picks of games, George. We've been, doing this competition for most of the season where we were picking teams that we thought would make the playoff. That, we wrapped that up last week. And now the first round of the very first 12-team college football playoff is upon us. And the first game is on Friday. And so Friday evening, and by the way, I am sitting here in Connecticut, looking to my side out the window and watching people out there shoveling snow, which gives you an indication that there's at least a chance that a few of these sites, Notre Dame, Ohio State, and Penn State being the three, most likely that would possibly have snow. I'm not saying that there will be. I haven't looked ahead at the forecast, but it could be something that we have never seen before in the college football playoff, which is at the very least we should have cold weather, right? Even if it's not snowing. But first game.
Early forecast for SMU at Penn State was a wind chill of 15 degrees, which I'm sitting here in Central Texas and it's 65 degrees as we record this early Monday morning. And I'm talking about early Monday morning. It's not like the sun has begun to warm the earth. 65 degrees. So that could be a little different for the Mustangs. Now, I wish it was, one of these big SEC schools. That's what we've been hearing for years. We've been hearing for years, oh, wait till we get them up there where it's cold and the frozen tundra and this, that, and the other. Well, here you come. But there's not going to be, I will get to it in a minute. Tennessee at Ohio State, maybe that could do it, right? So, all right. Which game is Friday night?
We'll get I'll say this when we get to that game. But all right, so the first game, Indiana at Notre Dame. Now, obviously, both teams in the state of Indiana. So, look, there's a real lake effect with that weather in South Bend, but I don't think it's going to be so different from the weather in Bloomington that there's going to be a real advantage there. So, Indiana at Notre Dame. Obviously, Notre Dame had an expected good season, even though there was an unexpected loss to Northern Illinois early in the season. And then Indiana had an unexpectedly good season, but they're both sitting there at 11-1. And this is our first 12-team playoff game. Obviously, Notre Dame's favored. Who do you like, George?
I like Notre Dame. I think Notre Dame's really good. And I think we wrote them off. And by we, I mean the college football world essentially wrote them off after a loss that is still inexplicable to Northern Illinois in week 2. Right after they had a real solid game at Texas A&M. It wasn't a great Texas A&M team as it turned out, but Texas A&M and won on Kyle Field, which is not easy to do. I think they're really talented, really good, and I don't think their schedule was super strong this year, but it was representative, and all they did was what you're supposed to do after that Northern Illinois game. And I love the Indiana story. Maybe the offense can really get it blowing and going again. I like Notre Dame. I'm just going to give you a sneak peek. I think Notre Dame may go a while in this playoff. And we're not picking beyond the first round today. The more I look at it, And in a weird year, like there's no like, oh my goodness, it has to be this team. Notre Dame's got a real shot to run a long way in this thing. So I like them in
Yeah.
round one.
Well, I also like them in round one, but I think Indiana matches up okay with Notre Dame, better than a lot of teams would. One reason is because Indiana on the defensive front is pretty strong. They're not a team that's easy to run on. That's the key to stopping Notre Dame, first and foremost, just stopping them from running the ball. And so I think Indiana has a chance to do that. And then Indiana, given the cold weather, the fact that their offense is really predicated on running the ball and kind of a short passing game, I think they set up well to be able to play in this type of weather. And so the big question is this: can they block Notre Dame? Because they were not able to block Ohio State, which is really the only team they played all season. Well, that's not true. When it comes to the defensive front, Michigan, even though they don't have a great record, does have a very good defensive front. And Indiana, that was the other close game they played, aside from the loss to Ohio State. They did kind of struggle after the first quarter to generate a lot of offense against Michigan. So that is the big question for me. Can Indiana block Notre Dame? And if they can, I think this has a chance to be a really good game. But there's nothing there that gives me a real reason to latch on to Indiana with an upset pick. So I'm also going with the Irish.
Yeah. Okay.
The next game, so that's Friday night. There's a triple header on Saturday, and it starts at noon Eastern. SMU at Penn State. I would say the break that SMU catches is not the weather. It is that it's not at night. So I think there will be a whiteout in terms of, the fans wearing their white, but it's a more difficult place to play when it's a night game. But at least SMU does catch a little bit of a break. Not to mention it won't be as cold in the middle of the day either. But what's your pick here? SMU at Penn State.
Man, I'd love to pick SMU. I think Penn State was really impressive to me in the Big Ten championship game. And I think Penn State is really talented. And this has been a great year for SMU. Rhett Lashley's a guy I've known for a long time and really respect at SMU. Look, their offense is dynamic, but I like Penn State to win this. I like Penn State to win. I think they're just too good. I think their defense is pretty darn good.
Yeah, so I'm also with you on Penn State, and this is the one game where I think the weather could be the biggest factor for the visiting team.
Agree with that.
SMU, and I remember before the ACC championship game, Nick Saban picked Clemson to win, and the reason that he did is because he felt like that the field being a grass field in Charlotte, with it being cold, was not really going to be helpful to SMU's speed. Saban, and look, I say this because, like a lot of people, I have a lot of respect for Nick Saban's knowledge of football and his understanding of factors like this that most people would overlook. But I think SMU, after a slow start, ended up playing pretty well in that ACC championship game. But the fact that he thought that a cold grass field could be tough sledding, so to speak, for SMU, an offense that's really built on speed and quickness, I think it's even more true in this situation playing at Penn State. And so for that reason, I don't like SMU's chance to pull this upset. If this was in a dome, I might go with SMU. But Penn State, one thing you can say for them, George, they win the games they're supposed to win. Like if you're not ranked in the top 5, Penn State's probably going to beat you. And here's SMU sitting here at, I don't know, with number 11 or whatever, the number 11 seed. I don't know what their actual ranking was, but they're not top 5. So this is a game that I would expect Penn State to win.
Yeah, agreed.
Looking at the middle game of the day on Saturday, 4:00 Eastern, Clemson at Texas. And so this is one where you wouldn't expect cold weather to be a factor. So you're not too far away from Austin. You said it's in the 60s. So
it's supposed to get a
your
little
ACC
colder,
champion.
Texas standards.
Yep.
Yep. You'd be wearing
the only
shorts and
3
short
loss.
sleeves.
Exactly. The only 3-loss team in the field, Clemson, having to go to Texas. Both of Texas' losses this season were to Georgia. Georgia, by the way, destroyed Clemson the season opener for whatever that's worth. What do you make of this matchup?
Man, I really want to pick Clemson because I think they got better as the year went on. And Texas has just been a little bit disappointing to me, but I can't. I think Texas is the better team, and I think Texas will get it done. Saturday, by the way, the high in Austin is supposed to be 63, and of course, middle of the day, they'll catch the best of that if that's how it holds out. So yeah, I've got Texas winning it and moving forward. I'd love to pick. I'd love to pick an underdog here or the lower seeded team, but I can't get there yet.
Yeah, I can't get there with this matchup. Look, I don't think this Clemson team is as well. It's obviously not as good as some of the ones that they had, a few years ago, but I think it's better than some of the ones that they had in the last couple years. But I don't think they're back to a level where I would pick them to go on the road and win a game like this. I think this one really comes down to the Texas defense. And while I think Clemson, if they don't turn the ball over or have bad special teams plays to give Texas short fields and easy points, I think they could keep this one close, make Texas sweat a little bit. But I just don't think Clemson's going to be able to score enough against Texas to have a chance to win. So I'm with you there, and that takes us to the fourth and final playoff game of this first weekend, the opening round. 8:00 Eastern, Tennessee at Ohio State. What is your take?
Man, this is tough. And this is the one where it's at 8-9, right? So it's not really a lower seed or lower seeded, higher seeded. I can't even say that. It's 8-9.
Yeah.
Just stop.
Let me throw this out there, George, as you're saying that, though. I'm looking at this on ESPN.com, and it says here that Ohio State is a 7-point favorite, so a touchdown favorite, which that's surprising to me that they are that big of a favorite, even though they do have the home field.
Look, I don't know what Ohio State's mental state is after the Michigan game, after all the atmosphere around the program that's so negative because of the outsized importance placed on the Michigan game. And, Ryan Day has has lost 10 games in 7 years or whatever it is. And yet is like on a seat where they're putting cigarette lighters under a seat right now, right? And lighting them. It's a bad atmosphere there. That said, this is a team that talent-wise is at least as talented as any team in the field. Now, I've got some questions about quarterback with Will Howard and things like that, but they're really good. I think Tennessee is pretty good. I think Tennessee's defense will be the best Ohio State has faced. Penn State's is pretty good, pretty darn good too. I think Ohio State's going to win this, and I think Ohio State may be about to run the table. I'm not picking it yet because we don't have to, but I think Ohio State, if they overcome the mental issues of this deal, this could sort of fuel motivation for all of these guys too. I think they're good enough to go run the table. That's not how I'm picking it. I'm not there yet. We don't have to do that until as we move along, but I think they're good enough to do that. So I look at Notre Dame out of the first round and Ohio State out of the first round. I think both of those could win the whole thing. Where I don't think that about some of these other schools we're looking at in the first weekend. So I'll go Ohio State.
Okay, well, we are finally going to disagree on one, and I have not been very big on Tennessee throughout this season. I had a lot of reservations about their offense, and I'm still not completely sold on it, but I do think they match up well with Ohio State.
Mm-hmm.
The Buckeyes' weakness here over the end of the regular season has been its offensive line. They've had some injuries, and Tennessee's strength is its defensive front. Up front defensively, they're one of the best teams in college football, and I think they're going to give Ohio State a lot of trouble. We have seen Will Howard, while he has statistically had a very good season, when he has been under pressure, and that's happened in a few games later in the season, he has made some bad choices and ended up with some devastating plays, big plays for the other team. And that is a concern of mine for Ohio State going up against that Tennessee defense. Another thing is I think Tennessee can run the ball on Ohio State enough to be able to have some success. And I think it really comes down to quarterback play. And while I don't know that I would say I think that Nico Iamaleava, that's your guy, George, that he's going to go out there and, throw for 3 or 4 touchdowns. I think he's just got to be able to make a few plays, hit a few slants here and there, as the defense kind of pushes up, stop that run to keep them honest, and then not make any big mistakes. Like I said, that Will Howard has made some of those mistakes down the stretch. Iamaleava has got to, if he can keep from making mistakes, I think Tennessee wins this game if they don't go out there and give the ball up. And so I'm taking the Vols to pull the upset here. I don't think, look, for those who don't know their geography that well, Tennessee, you know where Tennessee is, but the University of Tennessee is in the mountains. And I don't think that the weather is going to be all that different in Columbus than what it is in Knoxville at this time of year. I think this is not Memphis. This is colder weather because of the elevation. And so I don't think that's going to be a big shock to their system. I like the Vols. So I'm glad we're on the opposite side of at least one game here.
Yeah, I don't know what the temperature is going to be. I've been in Columbus late in the year, and it is a whole lot different than Knoxville sometimes, but it just sort of depends. Yeah, listen, I'm glad we're on the opposite side too. So, hey, we got to wrap this up. I'm going to come back and do the second half where we talk about the topic we love the most. As much as we love college football, we love Jesus a whole lot more. And so let's go ahead and take a break, get to the locker room. We'll be right back with the second half of Gridiron and the Gospel of Faith in College Football podcast.
The Faith and Sports Institute at Baylor's Truett Seminary is a place where Christian leaders in sports are formed and equipped through theological education, practical training, and useful resources. As a sports ministry leader, coach, athlete, pastor, or student who wants to learn more, you can apply for admission in an online or residential graduate degree program, take continuing education certificate classes, and participate in character and leadership practicums. Start your journey at baylor.edu/Truett/FSI. Think deep, lead strong, and run the race well with the Faith and Sports Institute today.
Welcome back into Gridiron and the Gospel, a faith and college football podcast. I'm Brad Edwards along with George Schroeder, and we are now at the second half where we're going to talk about our faith in Jesus, and we get into it with our segment On My Heart. And George, you are up this week. What is on your heart?
Well, we heard about some of it earlier, and we probably got a little deeper into it in the first half than I could have. But I want to talk just briefly about that Army-Navy game, and you'll see what I mean in a minute. Let me start out by saying, as some of you guys who have listened to us know, in our church here in Texas, we're studying through the book of First Peter together, and we'll finish it here in early to mid-January, which just means the rookie lead pastor didn't plan it perfectly to finish, before Christmas or by the end of the calendar year, or whatever. It is what it is. You just go where the book sections lead you, right? But it's been tremendous. We're in 1 Peter 4. I'm going to read just a little bit of it, okay? Yeah, I guess what I'll start with is just verse 7. 1 Peter 4, verse 7. The end of all things is at hand, Peter writes. Therefore, be self-controlled and sober-minded for the sake of your prayers. Above all, keep loving one another earnestly, since love covers a multitude of sins. Show hospitality to one another without grumbling. As each has received a gift, use it to serve one another as good stewards of God's varied grace. Whoever speaks, as one who speaks oracles of God. Whoever serves, as one who serves by the strength that God supplies, in order that in everything God may be glorified through Jesus Christ. To him belong glory and dominion forever and ever. Amen. I actually have not preached that segment yet. We're going to preach it this coming Sunday. But the section before that, we ended with verse 7. The end of all things is at hand, because it sort of ties the two sections together. And I'm not going to get deep into that. But one of the things that I think about at Christmas time is, do you know what time it is? Do people know what time it is? And we get all excited about Christmas time, and we think about seeing our family and our friends. One of the best things about the drive or the time in Army-Navy for me was I flew out to Baltimore, and then our son had just finished Defense Information School at Fort Meade, Maryland, and was completing it. And so George and I drove back to Texas together. And what that meant was a day and a half of really long days in the car together. And what's interesting about that was it was tremendous. And I thought to myself, the bucket list that I talked about in the first half of getting to go to Army Navy was great. Better than that, though, was spending all that time with George in the car. We We had periods of silence. We had periods of bad karaoke together. We had, not that we were competing, just sort of, the natural singing together. We had periods of just sort of joking with each other. And then every so often we had some really good conversation together. In fits and starts, it was just not some formal now let's talk type of thing. It was just we had all sorts of time together, uninterrupted together, just the two of us. And as a dad, I cherished that. And I don't think I realized how much I would cherish it until it was going on. There was a point when I realized, my goodness, this is so good. But I would just say this: cherish the time that you have with your family members. Cherish the time you have with your family members. And as you think about Christmas, to take this back to the text, do you recognize that, Peter wrote this 2,000 years ago, this little letter to Christ followers in what's now northern Turkey. But when he writes in verse 7 of chapter 4 of 1 Peter, the end of all things is at hand, therefore be self-controlled, sober-minded for the sake of your prayers, love one another earnestly, all these things they're on following there. The end of all things is closer to at hand than it was then. And he's saying, live like you don't really have a tomorrow. Live for Christ. And so what I'm going to say is maximize the opportunities, to be with your family, to do bucket list things this Christmas. Yes, that. But make sure they, especially, but others, understand what Christmas actually means. Because the end of all things is at hand. I firmly believe that. I'm not predicting doomsday and apocalypse. That's not what I mean. One day Christ is returning. It's 2,000 years nearer than it was before, and we don't know what it is. And so he's saying, redeem the time you've been given. He's saying, redeem it to love people earnestly. And that involves making sure they know who Jesus, this little baby, is. So I'm not trying to take you all the way down the road to Christmas, because obviously we're going to talk about that a lot next week. But do you know what time it is? I guess I should say one more thing about that trip. Long time in the car. There was a moment or two when not my playlist, but George's playlist was some sort of a country Christmas playlist. And I quickly understood something I knew, but now I know, experience, that if you've ever cut a record in Nashville, your second or third record was a country Christmas album. And it wasn't necessarily really good. But I've heard the Christmas song in about 72 different twangs now. And at a certain point, it's like I've had all I can take of country Christmas. But whether it was country Christmas or just sort of our culture's Christmas songs, do you realize how many of those songs, they're all about warm, fuzzy fun with family? And make sure your friends and family love them, all that stuff. And I even kind of alluded to that a second ago too. What they're not about, largely, is about God sending his son to earth to live as a servant, essentially, for us, and to die a painful, excruciating, embarrassing, shameful death to pay the penalty for sin, and then rising again, conquering death, and doing those things so God comes down to man to be with us so that we can be with him. That's not what those songs are about. So I was struck by that, not so much by the twang, although as much as I love George Strait, I never want to hear another George Strait Christmas song. Just want to let you know. But do you know what time it is? It's Christmas time, but you know what that means. And will you tell people about it? So that's what's on my heart. I understand that was a little bit of a jumble, but I've just sort of been thinking through that a little bit based on what we're teaching through in our church, and then the experience that I was able to have with George. Man, make sure you get the time with your friends and family. And if they don't know Jesus, would you make sure they understand the reason that we celebrate Christmas and how much they need him? That's what's on my heart.
Thanks, George. It's something that kind of hits home for me also as a father. I have kids that are 18 and 16. And so while I have spent a lot of time in the car over the years talking to them about faith, talking to them about the Bible, I look forward to the day and hope I have the opportunity to speak with them more one-on-one, especially with an extended time like you have. And that's rare to have the amount of time that you had to just be able to have a private one-on-one conversation. And I hope I do get that opportunity to just dig a little bit deeper and kind of just, be able to learn a little bit more about what is really going on in their hearts as far as
That's right.
as far as their faith goes. And it's something that, I think back on my own experience growing up, and I was one of 3 kids. And, as a lot of people know, like once you get to 3+ kids, things can get pretty chaotic, at times. And as many memorable moments as I have with my dad, I don't have a lot of one-on-one moments when I was older, right? Where we had really adult conversations, and especially about faith. And I wish that was something that I'd had the opportunity to do. And so I would just kind of echo what you said, which is for parents out there, just be aware that opportunities like that they're not easy to come by if you have grown children, and especially if you have more than one of them. And if you do have that chance to spend that time, not just the quality time, but to have those conversations, it's a great thing to be able to have. And I hope that I get that opportunity sometime soon.
Absolutely.
I really appreciate that.
I hope you do too. So, and look, if you get that opportunity, I appreciate one of the things you said. You don't want to make it formal and stilted, but if the opportunity comes for you to spend uninterrupted, long time with one of your kids, turn the conversation to spiritual things. Where are they? What are they reading? How's God working in their lives, right? Ask him the question our friend Jason Romano from Sports Spectrum, friend of the pod, asks his guests at the end of every pod. How's God working right now in your life? Ask him that. Now I don't know if that's the first question you want to ask. It kind of depends on your relationship, but don't miss the opportunity, A, to spend time with them and to love them, but B, to see where they are and how they're doing. Because ultimately that's what matters is their relationship with Christ.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess it's a good way to wrap it up. I'm sorry we have to wrap it up, but we got to get going. And when we talk to everybody again, when you hear our voices the next time, we will be finished with round 1 of the college football playoff, and we'll obviously get into that on next week's show. But for now, hey, thank you for listening. George, you mentioned it earlier, but if you wanted to watch instead of just listen, we are on YouTube. Just search for Gridiron and the Gospel. As always, you can visit us online at gridironandthegospel.com and find us on Twitter or Instagram at gridiron_gospel.
Yeah, and you can reach out to us individually on Twitter at George Schroeder or at jbradedwards. Email us at gridirongospelpod@gmail.com. We'll talk college football with you. We'd love to talk about Christ with you. So if anything that we've said triggers anything, email us at gridirongospelpod@gmail.com or reach out to us on Twitter.
And be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to us in your favorite podcast app. We're on all the major podcasting platforms. Just search for Gridiron and the Gospel or follow the links on the show website. And once again, I want to thank, or we both would like to thank, the Faith and Sports Institute at Baylor's Truett Seminary for sponsoring our pick segment. And if you would like to partner with Gridiron and the Gospel, we would love to explore that. Email us at the address that George mentioned, gridirongospelpod@gmail.com, and we'd like to have that conversation.
Absolutely. Next week, we'll be talking about the first steps of a new world, the college football playoffs first round, and what comes next in the quarterfinals. So tune in next week for more Gridiron and the Gospel, a faith and college football podcast.